Years ago, not even too long ago, 100 years ago or so, people had hyper locally sourced food. Why? Because we didn't have refrigerated trucks. You had to have food that was fresh, otherwise it would spoil and you wouldn't have access to it. So there was lots of small little farms everywhere dotted all over the place to feed, almost like small little setups or tribes, towns had their own setups, right? In comes walk refrigeration. It's new technology. It's disruptive. Now you can truck it in from anywhere in the country.
Or the world.
In the world now, exactly. I've actually watched some things that went from somewhere in Africa, got sent somewhere to Brazil to get packaged up, and then got sent somewhere in the United States into a store. It took like weeks. So a lot of times, the food we get is weeks old. We don't even know it. We say it's safe and all that, but we know that's not true all the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, generally it's safe. But that technology alone kind of removed our ability to be able to fend for ourselves and fend locally. If you had people that were growing food, for example, would famine be a thing? Probably not, right? If everyone had the requirement to have a small garden with so much to be able to supply your food for your family, let's say 25% of the stuff you need has to be supplied by your own garden, that'd be something fun to try. Just as a requirement, right? Mm-hmm. Requirement to compost your stuff. You don't throw anything that could be potentially compost to the curb. That's what we do. We have a bin in our kitchen.
This is a requirement you'd give to like countries around the world?
Or just like a small pilot test group, right? Not to say you would control it, but you're trying to find a new way of life.
Yes.
So let's just say some people volunteer to live in this utopian-like society that are okay with doing these things, that want to do it. Like, just try it. They're okay to grow mushrooms because mushrooms literally grow on trash if you want them to, and they produce food for you that are very nutritious. But yet we invest in like beef, for example, because it's what people want. They want the meat, they want the taste of beef, etc. And it's what's big in this country because it's fattening and it's high calorie. But realistically, mushrooms would be a much better option as opposed to meats. Or if you want to do meat, then have some chickens on your property. I've had 17 chickens at one point. That's why I'm a fan of chickens.
Amazing.
They lay an egg a day. The hens do. I never had a rooster. I only had hens. And if you wanted a rooster, you can grow your own chickens and then eat meat birds too. And you can have your own meat at that point. But then you got to actually go through the case of cutting it open and processing that bird. No one wants to do that. They don't want to think about it. They want to get it in a package from the store and say, oh, it's chicken. No, it was a bird with feathers that someone pulled apart for you. Right? But people don't want to think about that part of it.
That's where it gets hard because I would love if every society around the world has locally sourced food. I mean, the amount of preservatives and chemicals that are placed just to preserve food that's traveling around the world before it gets to your stomach is really wild. And I wonder if it's even can you make a scalable solution where we can still feed the entire world? Because I mean, I guess there's two problems we're looking at, right? I guess for famines, I guess countries around the world that have a high rates of famine, that could be potentially fixed if there is like money invested into creating a system where now we have a regulation where there needs to be this many farms in each region.
Yes.
Maybe they could solve famine. But let's look at a country like America, for example, where maybe famine is not the biggest problem, but unhealthy and obesity and diabetes and cancer is a problem, right? Mm-hmm. I guess we like to brush away like that the chemicals in our food are causing those problems, and instead we like to be like, well, I'm living in New York City, I'm busy, I have work, I'm going to go grab lunch at this restaurant, I'm going to go to the supermarket, buy the cheapest option I can, who cares where it came from, who cares who opened it. I guess those societies would be a lot more resistant to like, oh, wait, now we have a farm over here, like a rooftop farm in New York City, or this farm in this society here, and because it'll definitely be more expensive.
It would be more expensive, but why? Because it's rare and supply and demand, right? So it's not a lot available. So if someone says, for example, fresh microgreens, the tray I showed you, it's 10 inches by 20 inches. If I were to sell that to someone, it'd be like $40 to $80 for that amount of microgreens, which is insane if you think about it. But the reason is no supply and demand that drives that value up.
Yes.
But if everyone grew, for example, some microgreens or whatever they want to grow in their garden, it offsets that. Now it's available to everybody. Mm-hmm. Think about like cannabis in California and Colorado. It's highly prevalent. There's a lot of supply, and there's demand's high, but the supply is so high that it's cheap. Mm-hmm. Right? So I think it's supply and demand that drives some of that. And folks that are really hyper focused on getting hyper fresh food, which is hyper locally sourced, like you're talking about, like on rooftops, etc., everyone's going to flock there. Which then, how do you deal with that? Is you drive the price up to then make more money, right? Because it's all capitalism. But survival, to your point, when someone's in a country that's starving, if you're able to like invest in a small, cheap greenhouse setup, bring in some fresh soil, teach them how to do a certain process to turn their waste products into fresh soil they can use for growing their own food, and then recycle and grow in a permaculture kind of society. I think that's, something that we can get around and start at least trying.
Yeah, I'd be happy to hopefully. I mean, I feel like a lot of groups are trying to doing that as well. I mean, I guess the awareness of the problems with the food we're eating is definitely growing. So I'm definitely hopeful groups around the world and their initiatives and entrepreneurs can help to fix those problems.
Hopefully.
I wonder, is in your solution, is it like there's a farm that supplies maybe the people in that area, or is it like every individual person is growing their own?
When I talked about earlier, so in that case, it'd be like, I wouldn't say a requirement, but strongly urged and suggested that you supply yourself with X% amount of food that you need within your own garden. And if you don't know how to do that, then help will be provided so that you can make sure you understand how that can be done.
Interesting. Like what kind of help? Just like guidance on like how you do
like
it?
Experts to come in and help. Like this, like someone who helps out, that you paid to help with all the gardening needs, a horticulturist that helps understand what the soil problems are if you have soil problems, right? A chemist, all this kind of stuff that could be, again, takes money and investment, but if you set it up in a certain way, it becomes part of the culture, part of the society. It's the normal. And if everyone's got extra beans or something, they can give it to their neighbor who happens to be lacking. Then you're talking about having community. Well, we don't have any communities anymore. I have neighbors here, sure I do, but I won't talk to them hardly ever. There's no community. Where there was
not the same.
Years ago, that was community. Sharing things, borrowing a cup of sugar from your neighbor, that was a thing back then. It's not a thing anymore. At least not in the communities that I lived in.
Yeah. Interesting. I think culture is honestly the biggest way we could probably fix a problem like this, but I mean, again, humans are resistant to change, so I'm curious about how we're going to do that. And there's probably ideas people will come up with that can help guide us. And I mean, we've come up with so much crazy shit in the past. I'm sure that can't be the hardest thing in the world.
Right.
But I still it's hard for me to believe that investment, or even if we get a big enough supply, like I feel like the industry level packaging and production will always be cheaper. So I feel like the incentive for that will always be there.
It's like my wife always says, how much time do you spend to make a loaf of bread when I can buy a loaf of bread for $2 in the store? I'm like, yes, but my bread has 3 ingredients: flour, water, salt. The bread you're buying in the store has like 16 ingredients, and most of them are preservatives. So that's the difference, right? It's much better when you make it yourself. It tastes better when it's fresh. When you pull something off the vine, like my kids, when I grew beans, sugar snap peas, etc., they would take them off the vine. They would pick off the one spine that was too fibrous, and they eat it right off the vine because that's how fresh it was, and they tasted so much different. Just like the eggs I have when I had chickens. When you have free-range chickens that do their own thing and eat whatever they eat, their eggs are like dark orange in the yolk.
Wow. They're
not yellow like that pale yellow in the Michigan sign, for example. That's the yolks you get in the store.
Yeah.
Sometimes worse. But that's not how yolks are for real when they're nutritious. They're like dark orange.
I didn't even know that.
They taste completely different. Also, did you know that when you have an egg that comes out of a chicken, you don't have to refrigerate it for months?
Really?
Yes. Because if it's in like the summer heat, no. But if it's on the counter in your house where it's climate controlled, they could be there for a long time. And the reasoning is when it comes out of the chicken, there's a mucosal coating called the bloom coating that hits the egg. But when commercial farmers process eggs for delivery across the country, one of the things they do is they wash the eggs. Why? Well, because they have to be clean. Otherwise, consumers will complain and think they're dirty. But in reality, they probably had some chicken poop on them that they had to brush off or wash off. And they bleached them to make sure there's no salmonella on them. And at that point, that bloom coating, that mucus coating is gone. Now the egg is permeable again and can get bacteria introduced to it, which makes them go bad and sour and rot. So because of refrigeration and providing eggs at scale at long distances is the reason you have to refrigerate your eggs. Otherwise, you don't have to.
Wow.
I had them on my counter forever and never refrigerated them, and they're never sour. Unless I happened to get a bad one that was at the bottom of the coop, I didn't notice it, and a chicken kicked it up one day, and I grabbed it, and it was in the summer heat. I was like, ooh, those aren't good. They're like liquid.